Oh, wow. This is great news, Lily. I'm very excited to hear this.
Welcome to Groovy Movies. My name is Lily Austin.
And my name is James Brailsford. Hello.
Hey, James. How the hell are you?
You know, not too bad. Another day, another dollar. Just been, what have I been doing?
On the Saturday.
You know.
Just making it rain every day of the week.
Well, not making it rain. I've got a leaky bucket that I'm trying to patch up. And I'm stood out in the dry sun just going, come on, please, rain. Make it rain.
Oh, God. Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah.
Tough times.
But with the few pennies I do have, of course, I've been going to the cinema so that we can keep this podcast trucking.
Yeah, it was an interesting week, starting off with Mother's Instinct, being somewhat disappointed and then doing a sharp turn into Civil War. Yeah, we pivoted. Yeah. We pivoted on what we wanted to talk about.
I was hoping that that Mother's Instinct might have enough meat on the bones to be worth us discussing. So I still haven't seen it yet. But after your... You know, you didn't seem too enthused by it. It seemed, right, enough of that nonsense then. Let's go full tilt Civil War.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was okay. Like, it wasn't terrible, but I just didn't think it was original enough for there to be much for us to chat about.
Did it seem like kind of business stuff you've seen before done nice enough? Yeah.
Yeah, it just seemed like quite a predictable thriller, really. So, okay. I mean, I didn't want to be negative, so that was why we weren't going to talk about it, but here we are.
So we have pivoted to pretty much the opposite end of the cinematic spectrum and gone for Alex Garland's Civil War, which is A24's latest offering.
That's right, and yeah, with a budget of 50 million, it's also their biggest movie to date. It's predicted to gross around 20 million this weekend. So by the time you're listening to this, guys, you'll be able to look it up. Who knows? But if it does hit that mark, it's going to break A24's record and even potentially push Godzilla x Kong off the top spot. So big weekend for A24. It's interesting because they've only been around since 2012, and yet they just seem they cannot put a foot wrong. They just go from strength to strength.
I was surprised when I researched the background because I realized, I don't actually know anything really about the background of A24. And then when I researched it, I was like, oh, they're a very new operation. God, they've done well. But then when you research it, you realize it wasn't like a bunch of college students who had a big dream of making a studio. This was quite seasoned industry professionals who saw a gap in the market that they identified that wasn't being serviced by low-budget, independent films that were different from the mainstream. And I think they took seed capital from Guggenheim Partners, where one of them was the head of their film financing department. So these were seasoned industry and finance industry experts.
Because it was founded by three guys, two of whom are called David Fenkel and David Katz, and also a man called John Hodges. So far, so standard names, but they are not standard men because you're right. They saw this gap in the market for well-made, high-quality movies that were targeted not at an older audience, like the kind of classic prestige TV shows and like big-budget kind of historical films, and instead wanted to appeal to like younger cinephiles. And also alongside that, decided that rather than doing the kind of standard traditional advertising strategies for films, so like, expensive print ads and posters everywhere, they would focus more on like digital marketing and using social media to reach their audience.
Yeah. I heard that 90% of their marketing spend is digital and online. So the vast majority of all their marketing is online because that's where their target audience lives, isn't it? Really, it's the social media world that the 20-something target audience. I suspect they're going for. That's where they are. So you've got to advertise where they're going to be.
And it's smart because it's not something I've even clocked, but it makes sense because their films, people are aware of them. Yep. They don't go under the radar. And I think that is that kind of really smart kind of social media marketing presence, that because we're all there, we're all on social media all the time. So
absolutely. And they've done all the smart stuff that you should do with any brand, which is they have a clear brand identity. Their Twitter account, it has character and a personality that reflects the kind of brand that it is. So they're doing all the right things that a modern a successful brand targeting a younger demographic should do, really. Which
Yeah.
is this kind of authentic voice. You use your social media. You don't feel like you're being given the hard sell.
So yeah, they started in 2012, and then in March 2013, they started out just in distribution initially. So they had this big deal with Spring Breakers,
Spring Break.
a film that James loves and I love less. But that was a big hit for them because the budget was 5 mil, but they made 32 million with that, which I didn't realize actually.
A24 are essentially doing what dozens of film production companies used to do and have kind of got squeezed out of the market, which is they make low budget films, or relatively low budget, that make a modest amount of money, because all the big studios have just gone for gamble big, spend 200 to 300 million, let's hope we make $1 billion. And it's the classic case of the more risk you take, the greater the reward, but the greater the loss. So maybe you only make 20 million on Spring Breakers or 15 million, you've still made money, because you just need to make $10 million on a 5 million budget, and then you're making profit. It's a lower risk, lower return situation, but it means you can build the studio a bit more sustainably.
That's a good point, because obviously to a big studio, 32 million is nothing. But if you're keeping your budgets low, it means you can slowly build up your output and keep it focused on passion projects. Because that's the thing with A24. If you look at all the movies they've made, they're always movies where it's original and the director and writer, their vision is at the heart of it.
That you can see that they are films that were wanting to be made by somebody. These weren't an assignment. A24 didn't say, oh, you know what, we just need like a rom-com. Anyone make us a rom-com? No, it's clear that people come to A24 with their passion project.
Totally, yeah. So then in 2014, they moved into production and made a splash because their first movie that they produced was Moonlight, Barry Jenkins' movie that went on to win the Best Picture Oscar, if everyone remembers that controversy with the wrong name being read out. And that was a budget of 1.5 million, so a tiny budget, and it grossed 65 million. So huge hit in every respect, both critical and financial.
Yeah, and what's interesting as well, and another little thing that it just kind of came across my path doing the research, is that the producer of Lady Bird is an older producer who's been in the industry for decades. And he said that his experience of working with A24 as producing partners was they're the best company he's ever worked with in his career. So not only are they producing good films that are commercial and critical hits on low budgets, but the people in the industry who are working with them, for a producer to say that they're the best company he's ever worked with in his decade-long career, that's got to mean something. So clearly they employ good staff and they've got a tight company.
And you can tell because the directors who work with them continue to work with them. Yorgos Lanthimos has worked with them for years. Ari Aster, all of his movies, Hereditary, etc., all came out. Joanna Hogg, all these incredible directors, all the directors that we know by name recognition who make incredible indie movies, basically, they all work with A24. So
yeah, I mean, it's a bit like sorry to raise this production company, but in the 90s, Miramax were doing that. They were making these low budget independents that they were the production company that kind of nurtured Tarantino, that kept they're doing that kind of thing for the current generation of filmmakers. They are the studio you kind of go to.
And lest we forget Euphoria, it's not just movies, it's TV as well. That's, huge hit. 32 Oscar nominations, 7 wins, and 23 Emmys. So across the board, just absolutely smashing it.
So they're on a roll. They're absolutely on a roll right now.
They're on a roll, but there was controversy last year when it was announced that they'd had like over 200 million in investment. And so there were big plans to expand. They opened offices in London. They've got eyes on other territories. And online, it was very much the narrative of, oh no, they're going to expand into big budget movies. Is this the end of the heyday of A24? And looking at the faces that you're pulling, James, I feel like you are concerned about this. But to my mind, Civil War proves that A24 are going to stay true to their roots and their USP of originality and an indie sensibility, even if they have more money to put behind some of these directors.
I agree with you that they're still staying to the roots, but I wonder if they will continue to make money as they kind of push themselves into this slightly bigger budget arena. I'm sure everyone at A24 will be looking at Civil War as very much a test case. Is there enough of an audience to bring a return on something like on this subject matter at this budget?
Shall I give us a little overview of the plot summary?
please.
Yeah, see, I'm volunteering myself for the
Thank
role,
you.
so be careful for next week. You might be on the
Okay.
on the I was
In the
gonna say on the
firing line.
chopping block, but hopefully not that. Okay, so Civil War. In case you guys haven't seen the trailer, it is set in, I'm assuming, a kind of an alternative now, right? It feels contemporary. It's set in an America where there is a totalitarian dictator, basically. There is a fascist president in charge, and two states, Texas and California, have banded together to try and
The Western Front.
Yes, it's known as the Western Front, and I think it's very interesting and significant that it's California and Texas, but we'll get to that later. The film opens with the president practicing his speech about where they're at in the war, which I think is interesting. I wonder what that means. And then we go on to follow a group of journalists and photojournalists as they head towards Washington to the White House, with the kind of the front of the battle. It's kind of a road movie essentially, because we're on the road for most of the film, heading that way, and you see what's happening in this war as you go.
Yeah, I mean, as the film started to kind of progress, I thought, okay, this is very much a riff on Apocalypse Now, isn't it? In Apocalypse Now, you have a small team of people on a boat, and their mission is to get to Colonel Kurtz and terminate Colonel Kurtz. But they have a person they're trying to get to through a war zone. So I was like, okay, so Alex Garland is certainly riffing on Apocalypse Now with Civil War, because it's a very episodic film. Civil War, you know, there's the plot line is very loose, because the plot is they have to get to the White House, and so it's the vignettes that occur on their journey there into the heart of darkness.
So we follow Kirsten Dunst, who plays Lee, named after Lee Miller, the famous photojournalist. So from the get-go, you kind of get the sense that this film is very much about like the role of photojournalism and the press in a conflict. And then also Wagner Moura, who plays Joel, and Kaylee Spaney, who plays Jessie, who is the actor who was also in Priscilla. And I honestly did not realize until after the movie, doing my sort of post-movie research. Like, I could not believe that. She's a very good actor, because it's not like she looks that different, but just very different roles. And then also Stephen McKinley plays Sammy, so who's like, you know, the veteran journalist. So the four of them, Kaylee plays Jessie, who's like a young woman trying to break into the industry very much at the start of her career, and Lee and Joel are the kind of later in their career journalists who've seen a lot of war. So we've got these different roles within the crew who are headed there.
When I was watching this, I was hoping to kind of really get an understanding of the moral grey area that photojournalists have to take a stance in, really. But I didn't feel like I felt any of that at all, which was a shame. Because that's what I was hoping I would get some taste of.
Interesting. I was struck by the way it was filmed. The camera holds on there is a lot of violence in this movie, but the way it is filmed, the camera never looks away. It holds still on every violent moment, and in a way that makes you not want to look away either. You know, I didn't flinch and look away, even though some of the things I was watching were definitely, you know, unpleasant to watch. And I think that was reflecting the role of the journalist, perhaps, or how they view the role of journalism in war, which is like you're not meant to look away because we need to bear witness to violence. I think they were very willfully choosing not to reckon with it, because if you, as a journalist, if you go down that path, it's going to fuck you up. And I felt like there was Kirsten Dunst alludes to that, but I think in order to do that job, you can't really go that. But that doesn't mean as a viewer watching it, you don't think about it. Because I was thinking about it the whole way through. And in my mind, I thought that was what the film wanted me to do. But what was interesting was watching an interview with the cast. They referred to it, well, the journalists interviewing them referred to it as a love letter to journalism. And I thought that's interesting that was their perspective, because to me, I didn't feel like it was that. I felt like...
I definitely didn't think of it as a love letter to journalism, that's for sure, yeah.
What I loved about the film is, if you watch the trailer, you could think that this is going to be quite a standard action movie. Okay, using an interesting, like, an interesting take being like it's a civil war but in the US, but like you could assume that it was going to go down a more like standard route. But I felt like because it was so stark and it wasn't like glamorizing the conflict at all. It doesn't like basically there is no clear cut like baddies and goodies. You're not rooting for a particular side. The actual war itself isn't, I don't think, like portrayed in like a glamorous, exciting, actiony way. Like, oh, come on, yeah, we want you guys to win. But the one thing that I thought was slightly glamorous, though also I believe kind of fairly accurate, was early on when we meet all the journalists in the bar at the hotel where they're all staying, and there's like music playing and everyone's drinking and having a good time. And I believe it was interesting because they mentioned in this interview that they looked at a documentary about Marie Colvin, who was like a photojournalist, as a reference point. And I kept thinking about her memoir that I read. It's called like In Extremis. It's really good. Strongly recommend. And in that they talk about these bars that everyone, and it's like the one place during the conflict where you can have a bit of escapism from what's going on because you're there with your colleagues, you're all on the same page, and the drinks are flowing, and you just have a breather. But that seemed kind of glamorous. But apart from that, I didn't feel like it really was portraying journalism in a positive way, not in a negative, but just like I felt like it was questioning it.
I think what started to frustrate me with the film early on was I wasn't sure what its point was. And I know you could say, well, that's the point of the film. I didn't see it as a love letter to journalism, but I'm not sure what it was to journalism. There were two films I was thinking of all the way through the film, and there was one film that I've been thinking about afterwards. The two films I thought were the one that were referenced, which is Apocalypse Now, which I think is its clearest, like, let's say there's at least the structure of it, this like a group of ragtag people on a mission with very loosely unstructured stories. But then I was thinking of Spring Breakers, and I didn't realize A24 made Spring Breakers because I was thinking I would completely engage with this film in a much deeper level if it was much more abstracted. Because what I think what happened for me watching this film is that we have an attempt at abstraction by saying, then it's not really like Democrats versus Republicans. It's we're not saying it's who. It's like, because that doesn't matter. And it's true. I'm quite happy to abstract who the bad people and the good people are. That's good. It makes it a much more interesting film. But it wasn't abstracted enough. I'd like get it neon drenched, set it further in the future, make it a conflict, but let's discuss what the conflict is about. And because we've abstracted it further, I just think by making it a bit abstract, but also making it look and feel exactly like the real world didn't work for me. I think that was the fundamental kind of the thing that didn't quite settle.
I personally liked that it felt so real. Alex Garland wrote it during COVID, and they filmed it basically between COVID and the strikes of last year, kind of in that that moment. They took advantage. That was fortunate, but it then meant, it got pushed back and it's only now being released. That's 4 years basically from start to end. He hadn't anticipated it taking so long, but obviously with all these things, it did. But it's interesting that he wrote it before the January insurrection, and that there's so much about the film that feels reflective of that time. I mean, of course, he was writing it during COVID, and there was a lot of unrest with the riots that were going on around George Floyd and that kind of things. But it's kind of interesting that like it was almost slightly foreshadowing what ended up happening. And now we're at a point, right, of an election year where basically we're back to square one. Like I listened to an interview about Scar where he thought like I didn't expect to be in basically the exact same place I was in. We were in a few years ago, and it feels like deja vu. So I think it was a choice to make this movie realistic. But I thought the whole point of the film, right, is about the idea that polarization doesn't work. And the reason California and Texas are a team is because they have chosen to put their differences aside because there is a fascist dictator.
Here's the film I wanted to see. I wanted to see Texas and California pairing up and forming the Western Front. The amount of questions that asks, because Texas and California are clearly, in the real world we live in, are the most diametrically opposed politically you could ever imagine. So for them to come together, it's like, there's an interesting story. There's something. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see them forming the Western Front.
Right.
Because because I just felt like
because we didn't actually see it. We just knew theoretically that that's what's going on.
I did feel that, even though I'm comparing this to Apocalypse Now, it felt thin compared to Apocalypse Now. I wasn't sat asking myself lots of questions, like, for example,
Really?
Zone of Interest. It was making me think a lot about the nature of evil, the mundanity of evil, the way it was presented. I wasn't having those thoughts at all with Civil War, really. And I think part of it, Lily, is that it's not difficult for me to, without any effort, imagine a civil war in America. It's not a fantasy that's impossible to imagine. That looking at the news, it looks and feels like there's war zones kicking off around the world. So I think I found it quite a cold watch in a cinema. And unfortunately, the cinema was quite empty on a Friday afternoon, which it should really have a few people. So I just think it's possibly going to not really be that appealing to audiences who right now probably just want to escape a little bit. And this is, I just think the timing isn't great either. I just think it's going to be hard to get people to sit in a theatre and watch this.
So my cinema was packed. But having said that, yeah, it was absolutely rammed. I was at the BFI IMAX, and
were you?
I found my row.
Which one is it?
L. So it's slightly more expensive, like you suggested, but not so expensive that you're quite far back. I was exactly in the middle. I had enough leg room that I was comfortable enough. I could have done with a bit more, but I'm happy with L.
Oh, wow. This is great news, Lily. I'm very excited to hear this.
Yes. And okay, so just to talk about this experience. So as I was going into the cinema, I heard this guy go, "Oh, I thought it was going to be a 2.5-hour jobby. That's great." Because obviously his girlfriend had just said to him, the movie is only 1 hour and 54 minutes. So love that. Major points, because how rare that a big action movie would be so short, would be under 2 hours. So big tick from that. But as I was coming out of cinema, because I had so many things that I was thinking about during the film, so it really spoke to me. But I think a cold watch is I am totally with you on that, but I'll get back to that. But as we were leaving, I could hear someone talking to his friends saying, I didn't really get, whose side was who, what the conflict was about, kind of thing. And I could feel some dissatisfaction. Though I did also hear someone else saying it's even better on the third watch, who worked at the cinema. So I think it's definitely, I see the potential for this movie to be divisive, because in the cinema, I was a minority being a woman. Everyone in my row, it was all men who, they'd see their Friday night action movie or whatever. And I can imagine being disappointed, because it's not kind of gratuitous, exciting violence. It is cold-blooded.
I know, that's the thing. It's like,
for me, I found it very thought-provoking, all of that stuff was a deliberate choice. And I can understand why, you'd have preferred a slightly different film where it went into why exactly California and Texas got together, how that went about. But actually, to me, I thought that wasn't the story it was looking to tell. I think there were two things going on. I felt like there was quite a clear message about the importance of not being polarized, because I think just it's like showing what the most extreme situation, aka kind of a fascist president, and the necessity to put differences aside. But I think you're right. The timing is unfortunate, because I think Alex Garland was probably writing this movie in the midst of the height of Trump as president and all the controversy and difficulty around that during COVID. And so he's going further and being like, okay, but if we allow this stuff to happen because we are so divided, where it can lead. Unfortunately, we're at a point where it doesn't seem like, we're back to square one. We're in the exact same position. And you're right. I feel like within that context, a lot of people maybe don't want to explore that subject.
We like to discuss films that we're both passionate about, whereas this one, just I just to put my cards on the table, I'm a huge fan of Alex Garland as a director. I've watched every single one of his films. I watched every episode of Devs. I'm here for him.
He made Ex Machina,
which is still, I think, his
Annihilation?
strongest film. Yes, which I love, an underrated one. The last act of that, I absolutely love. But
I hate the last act of that.
See, really? Are you kidding? Because I watched this it was worth it for the last act.
God, I was just like, what's going on here?
That scene in the lighthouse. So good.
For me, I was like, where we've devolved. Okay, so this is great. So clearly we are Alex Garland. We we're kind of yin and yang on him. But there's a lot of love there in the round.
Oh yeah, we're both here for him. I just think that this film, it's very literal. There's no poetry. It's unrelentingly literal, and perhaps that's what it is for me.
Yeah.
I realize that the world right now is on a knife edge. I'm aware of that, and so seeing it literally portrayed, I just think it just was a bit too much. It's right here, right now, and when I turn the news on, it's like exactly the same.
But maybe that's what we need, though.
Well, let's see what the audience decide. The box office. I think this could be a bit too much of an ask of an audience to kind of get that over the. Let's say it needs to make 100 million to break even. Let's see if it gets there. I'm not sure it will.
Yeah, that opener on Thursday was good. It was strong. It's 2.5 mil. But yeah, there could be a steep drop off. I think maybe your gut is right. I think the fact that I enjoyed this action movie so much means it probably won't do very well.
Absolutely. I certainly wouldn't recommend this to anybody who likes action movies. This would not be on a list of recommendations because it's not really an action movie. It's a film about a civil war. And because of that, it has some action in it.
I think we were having the same kind of thoughts because I also did think about the fact that it's not a beautiful film to look at.
No.
It's like obviously got a big budget, but he's not done anything that interesting with the cinematography or anything like that. And again, I'm sure a deliberate choice because I think Ex Machina looks amazing.
Interesting you should say that because it's the same cinematographer. He's worked with Rob Hardy, if not on all of his films, then nearly all of them. So he did Ex Machina and he also shot Civil War.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you should note the cinematography because they did shoot it on a brand new camera that's like innovative in that it's got a built-in gimbal to stabilize the image. So you have a camera body and it's like basically got a built-in Steadicam. So you can just pick it up and start shooting and it'll look smooth and it'll look nice. You don't have to put tracks down or tripods.
There you go. It was very smooth.
But what it does, it just means you can kind of shoot, run and gun quite fast and it looks all right. But I did notice that especially on the IMAX screen, like those people's faces, look, you saw every pock and every hole. And again, in this kind of gritty civil war, it works, but it just means you're looking at a lot of faces, and it's not the most flattering image. And
that works for the movie.
I know, but I just like a little bit of just a little bit. Come on.
No,
I don't want to see every pore.
Oh no, I'm happy. I'm happy with the pause. I'm happy with the pause. But the other thing I wanted to say, something that like I kept thinking about during the film, was the fact that the film is very much focused on the story of these journalists, and particularly photojournalists, capturing the importance of capturing photos on the ground in war. Because actually, the heyday of photojournalism has been and gone. Photojournalism in conflict is basically a dying industry, as a lot of industries today, because of the rise of the smartphone and how interconnected we are across the world. You know, you don't need to hire a journalist from the New York Times to fly to this way and that way. There wouldn't be a photojournalist flying in from Hong Kong to be on the ground during a civil war, because everyone is on their phones posting images on social media all the time of what's going on around them. And you can just lift those images, or buy them from, X or whatever and use them. That is how the industry now works. This is something that photojournalists are talking about, the fact that there isn't really the business for it anymore, which is, there's pros and cons to that, It just felt very, very out of step with actually what's happening in the world. And there was this moment where they talked about, no signals. So I think they were trying to, for a very brief moment, explain why it was made sense. But it's like, okay, sure. I don't think...
Well, Lily, you've just parked us right in a topic that I was thinking, can I wedge this in here? So I'm going to go for it now. Do you fancy having a quick talk about synecdoches or synecdoches? You tell me how you pronounce it, because I'm not sure. Synecdoches?
I don't know what you're saying.
A synecdoche.
What is a synecdoche?
It's a part that represents the whole. So...
A part that represents the whole. How do you spell that? Oh my God, you're teaching me things.
Synec. It's like Synecdoche, New York, the film by Charlie Kaufman.
Oh, yes, I have seen that movie. I didn't know how you...
to pronounce it. So anyway, leave us a comment on our socials. Tell us how you pronounce it. Let's go with synecdoche, right? So anyway, it's a part that represents the whole. And so in filmmaking, I think the shot of the Harkonnens' whips in Dune, when we have that close-up on their belts and you can see a whip, that one shot of a part of a Harkonnen represents the entire society. That whip represents immediately brutality, cruelty, sadism. So, from one shot, you get a whole, right?
Love it.
And
Obsessed with Synodokes.
And so there was a moment in Civil War where I just thought, this one part is summing up, I think, the whole kind of, there's just something not quite gelling for me. And it was when Jessie is developing her 35mm film.
I knew exactly what you were going to say, James. Because, for me as well, I was like,
What? and well, no, just that. Like I'm a huge advocate for film. I go on about film all the time, but not in a war zone.
Yeah, so she's on some bleachers in a makeshift camp, and she's got all of her film equipment with her. She's got her film. She's developing it there.
Analog film with chemicals.
Film. Yeah, she's got the chemicals. She's putting them in a thing. She's bringing out the film. But then, to tie it to the modern day, she's somehow feeding it through this device to look at her images on her phone. And it's just like, I'm sorry, in what world with a 23-year-old? I don't care that these cameras are her dad, that she would be shooting on film. It makes no sense.
In what world has Kirsten Dunst, a grizzled, experienced combat veteran, a photographer, not go, what the fuck are you doing shooting on film in a war zone? She's just totally calm. But so it was that thing I realized then. It was we're watching a film that is set in an alternate world, but it's not quite grounded. So if that thing isn't quite grounded right, like everything else has
because it's meant to be completely realistic. And then we've got this very jarring thing that this wouldn't be happening.
So I was like, that's the Synecdoche thing going on there. I'll bring it up with Lily if I can get it in there.
So you're saying that the Synecdoche is the fact that the film doesn't work, and that one scene, it reflects the whole.
Because I think that one scene is the most visible where you go, oh wait, that doesn't quite ring true. And I think I had that feeling throughout the whole film, it's just not quite ringing true, and I can't put my finger on it. And in that one scene, it's like, oh no, I can put my finger on what's going there.
Okay, yeah, I see that. That moment was jarring for me too, and there are a few moments like that. But I think overall, I hate to say it sounds very wanky, but I think it's an important film, and it does, at least it made me think, and I'm glad it exists. And I think Alex Garland did a good job. I think it's solid. I think as far as a big budget movie goes, it's very interesting and very different. I mean, I've never seen a film that so starkly shows the brutality of war, and I appreciated that. So I think it's solid. I think everyone should go see it. I want A24 to continue to do well, and I don't want them to go into franchise or generic movie territory. And this film is definitely original, but you're right, maybe it doesn't always land.
I'm with you on that, Lily. I want A24 to succeed and go ahead, so I don't want to discourage people from seeing this film, but for me, it's,
I think it's worth a watch. It's definitely worth a watch. It will make you think. This film would not have been made without Trump, despite it being, it's reflective of the world over. This is not specific to America. Even though it's an odd time to go see it, in a way, I think it's an important time to go see it.
I do agree with you that this film absolutely, it wouldn't exist without Trump. And I think that also somehow, again, plays into this muddied water because the fictional world they've set it in, it's not clear which side we're on. And I get that. But it's also clear that this film wouldn't have happened without Trump. So it's clear that the president in the White House is a Trump-esque president. So even though we're trying to say, but it's not quite clearly one side, there's clearly a side that the writer has taken. And I think he's just tried to obfuscate that a little bit.
I actually think his side it's not about being Democrat or Republican. I think the whole film is about not being polarized, and therefore the film itself isn't polarized. We're not entering into this conflict clearly on one side or the other. I think it's just meant to show two things, and that might be the problem. It's actually not very clear in its mission, because on the one hand, I think it's a film all about journalism and the role of the press and how clinical and cold that needs to be, and the film reflects that. But then also it's got this political message going on, but the whole point they're trying to do is not get political, and that is the message. But if you don't get political, then you're not really getting into it, and then what's going on. And then I thought the ending of it, just to quickly finish on that note without giving any spoilers, you're really not rooting for the good guys, even at the end. It reminded me, the film kind of reminded me of Guantanamo Bay at the end. And that's not a spoiler, I don't think. Like, it really isn't. But it just, like, it was, like, so cold and harsh. And, you know, no one's coming out of this looking good. And I think that is the whole point. But you're right. Perhaps that can feel a bit confused at time or a little bit unclear. And I'm happy with that. I liked the lack of clarity. I liked that the film was giving me things to think about without being very clear. But maybe that could, for a lot of people, that could be a shortcoming for sure.
I'm definitely very interested to see how this plays out in the next couple of weeks. My feeling is it's not going to be as controversial as perhaps we might think it's being. I don't know. Let's see how it plays out.
I think we're at a point now. I think the fact that it doesn't take a strong position means that it won't be that controversial. But I don't know if that's what people want from a big action blockbuster. Maybe, well, it's just the fact that so much money was spent on the movie. If they'd had a smaller budget for it, it might have been a bit safer. I don't know if they needed that big budget. But I guess to get a Kirsten Dunst.
Yeah, but it was more that some of the action set pieces, they are quite spectacular. When you watch them, you're like, oh, wait, when the action does kick in, it's pretty good.
Yeah, the final scene is really epic. I felt the audience were like, okay, cool. Now we're getting going. There were a few amazing set pieces.
Oh, yeah. No, there were some moments in it where absolutely that's Alex Garland. He's hit his stride in these sequences. And the sound design all the way through was excellent. I love that bit right at the beginning with the static burst from the TV sets going all around you when the A24 logo came up. So, lots I enjoyed. But for me, I'll still go to the next Alex Garland film, but this for me was a bit of a misstep. But I'm looking forward to his next film, because he is a good director.
Yeah, totally. All right, well, shall we finish with a trip to the film pharmacy?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a letter that goes something like this. Dear Lily and James, I experienced a low point recently where I was washing the shih tzu of a Russian oligarch in a flooded shower in the dark. How can I feel better?
Who is this listener? Who are you?
I don't know. Why was it flooded and why was it dark? Anyway, how can I feel better about working for the man? / summon the courage to ask them to change the light bulb. Okay, that's why we're in the dark. The light bulb was out.
There we go. I mean, there's so many. There's enough questions. There's more questions than I can answer with a film recommendation here.
It's true. Yeah.
But of course, we've got stuff up our sleeves. I'm sure. How about you, Lily? So, what are you thinking, Lily? What's your film prescription?
Okay, well, my film prescription is also a throw forward to our next episode because...
Oh, you big cross-promoter.
I know, cross-promoter. Is it also laziness that I didn't think of something else? But it just comes to mind that I think it would suit. So I think that Perfect Days is a good film to make you feel better about working for the man because this is a film that we're going to be talking about next week along with Zone of Interest, which we also talked about earlier. So guys... Ahead of that, maybe you should watch both these movies. I would strongly recommend. They're both fantastic. And definitely Perfect Days for reasons that we will explain in 2 weeks' time.
It'll set you up for the pod?
I think it really does. It's a real balm for anyone doing what could be considered kind of, dog's body work. Huh? See what I did there?
I see what you did there, Lily. See what you did there. I was thinking, stretching my brain, and the one that dropped into my head was Idiocracy. I don't know if you've seen that. It follows a guy called Joe Bowers, and he's a completely average American who works for the US military. He's just like, I would say below average, but let's just say it's average intelligence. And for that exact reason, for his average IQ, he's selected for a military experiment, which is he's going to be put into cryogenic hibernation for, I think, 100 years, but something goes wrong and he falls asleep for 500 years and he wakes up in an America of the future. And it basically what's happened is that dumbing down has occurred over the generations, just slowly. And it shows you how the dumbing down occurs, and it shows you like little vox pops of people over the decades and the years. And so suddenly this completely average American is now the brainiest man on the planet. And so it's a comedy following him as an average man is now a superhero in the world that he's woken up in. Okay,
that sounds quite fascinating. Very high concept. It's almost like you wanted to come up with something that was like the opposite of Civil War. You're like, I want something that's like super explained, super full of the story, the backstory, the future story. I love
and
it.
a comedy and a good laugh, because I just watched Civil War. I need to cheer up.
Yeah.
So-
Okay. Yeah. Good. Perfect. I think that sounds amazing. Okay. So how would that make this listener feel better about working for the man?
Yeah, it's tangential at best, I will be honest with you. But I would say it's something along the lines of it could be much worse.
Okay, I love that. Great. I think that works. Perfect. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Groovy Movies.
Thank you, as always. And if you could leave us a 5-star review, it all helps get the podcast out to a wider audience.
So we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Follow us on Instagram at Groovy Movies Pod or email us groovymoviespod@gmail.com.
Groovy Movies was produced and edited by Lily Austin.
Music and sound by James Brailsford.
Our logo was designed by Abby Jo Sheldon.
For references and more information about the films discussed, check out the show notes.